evening, everyone. Good to see all of you here this evening. One of the things I failed to mention this morning as I was introducing Jared is really a great family man. He really loves his children and his wife, and he demonstrates that if you just are around his children for very long, you'll see that they are just really good kids and well behaved, and that's probably a lot because of Brittany. But anyway, he's great. One of the things as I was sitting behind him this morning, I don't know why it caught my attention, but I noticed that his Bible was sitting below the pew on the floor there, and I noticed it on his Bible where most of us have our names, Richard Sutton or Sally Ann or whatever. On his it says Daddy. And that says a lot about him in terms of his character and in terms of him being a parent and a father and a husband. It just says a lot about him. Also, I wanted to commend you as a congregation for the way you participated so well this morning in getting the fellowship area taken up and then set back up. But the hamburgers were incredible. Brock and Alicia, they did an incredible job there along with their team, as well as those of you who brought various kinds of side dishes and desserts and so forth. It was just really a great potluck, and is one that I think one of the better ones that we've had for some time now. And so thank you so much for participating and being a part of it, and also for so many of you staying around and getting an opportunity just to be with each other, as well as to visit some with the McCormicks and so forth. So I've been away for a couple of weeks. Actually, only took 1 week off, but during that time away, I spent a little bit of my free time doing some reading of several books. And one of the books that I took time to read was a book that was entitled The Tattooist of Auschwitz. It's a true story about a Nazi death camp that existed in Poland during the Second World War. It was a death camp because in the period of time that Auschwitz existed, the Nazis had incarcerated, or at least brought as many as 1,475,535 people was their number. The numbers, most of the historians that look at it said that there are probably at least 1.3 million Jews and different parts of society that was incarcerated at Auschwitz. And during that period of time, 1.1 million people were murdered for no other reason than their race. In the book, The Tattooist of Auschwitz, it's a story about a man by the name of Lel Sokolov. Lel Sokolov was the tattooist. It's not because he wanted to be that, it's because when he was incarcerated at Auschwitz and he walked through the gates of Auschwitz and was put into his compound and into his barracks and then came out of it one day, they said, "You're going to be the tattooist." And you had no choice in the matter, and if he were decided to refuse to be the tattooist, then they would have shot him on the spot, and someone would have taken his place and would have been the tattooist. The work of the tattooist was to put tattoos on people. I mean, he wasn't putting a flower or a bird or a snake or a skull and crossbones or anything like that on him. He simply tattooed a number. He tattooed a number on men and women and children. And it was just a number, which reduced them as human beings from being human beings to nothing but a number. And because they were nothing more than a number, they were extinguishable or could be exterminated. Because Lel decided that he would be the tattooist, he was seen by his people as a traitor. And many of them hated him because of that. To tattoo a man was one thing. To tattoo a woman was even a lower thing. To tattoo a child was even worse. Because of him being the tattooist, they would isolate him from the rest of the compounds and from the rest of the barracks because they were afraid that someone would take his life, which probably would have happened. But along with that came some benefits. He was given a bigger ration than most of the people were given there. Many of them starved to death because they were given just a soup with nothing in it. It was just watered down something or another. He was given a soup that had sometimes a potato in it, or sometimes some carrots or onions, or sometimes even some meat. He had another benefit. He was allowed to travel or to move about within the compounds, to move about between Auschwitz I and Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is about a 3-kilometer distance away from the two camps. both were death camps. Birkenau became an extreme extermination camp and so forth, but he was allowed to travel between them as he would meet people at the gates as they would be transferred in railroad cars and then would be taken off the railroad cars. He would then tattoo them along with an assistant. He'd put the tattoos on them. So he is allowed to move about where other incarcerated Jews were not allowed to move about. He could move about, and because of that, he became friends with different kinds of individuals who would go to work inside the camp who were not Jews, but who were citizens of the surrounding area, and they were brought in to do various kinds of manual labor, and he went over and he learned their names, and he built a friendship with them, and over time, he was able to get things from them. He's able to trade with them things like jewelry, diamonds, gold, earrings, finger rings, bracelets, necklaces, and so forth, that the Nazis would take off the Jews as they would come into Auschwitz. They would take all their valuables away from them, all their jewelry and so forth. They would cut their hair and use it for other kinds of things. They would take their glasses. They would take everything away from them. And because of that, he became friends with several women in the women's side of the camp, as well as some of the men. And those who worked in those areas, he was able to strike a deal with them that if they would pilfer some of the jewelry, he would take that jewelry and he would exchange it with these people for a sausage or for bread or for cheese. And he, as a tattooist, would then take these meager rations that he would have and he would break them up and portion them out, and he would go into the other Jewish compounds and into the barracks, and there he would give people small portions of food that would sustain them alive. And he went from being a traitor to being a person who was known for his compassion and for his kindness and for his goodness and his sacrifice, because he once was caught, and when he was caught, he was on the death row himself, and miraculously he was able to get off it, but he was able to do those meager kinds of things to help these individuals. And because of his determination, he was able to bring a tremendous amount of hope into the lives of people who were so desperate for life itself. I've shared all this with you because I want to ask you this question. Do you have a friend that, if they're in that kind of position, would be that kind of friend to you? Do you have a friend that gives you a word of encouragement rather than that of judgment? Do you have a person in your life that, when you're going through hard parts in your life, or will come over and put their arms around you and maybe have a knowing wink in their eye, or maybe a knowing touch in their hands, that they would do something for you that was just like a refreshing spring shower upon your life when your life feels torched, or when you feel as though you have been beaten down, who would give you just a cool cup of encouragement? Actress Celeste Holm said this: "We live by encouragement, and we die without it, slowly, sadly, and angrily. How tragic it would be to go through life without human refreshment. How tragic it would be to go through life without someone who has your back, who would come alongside you when you go through a hard part in your life, whether it was some kind of physical illness, or whether it was maybe some kind of economical downturn, or maybe some circumstances happened in your life that just really put you on your back and made you feel as though you were a prisoner, and you felt the walls begin to close in around you, to know that there was someone there in your life that would be able to be there for you." What kind of qualities does someone like that take to be that kind of a person? Well, if you were to ask the Apostle Paul what kind of person would be the one that was in his most desperate situation that he had ever found himself in his life, who would that person be? And he would say to you, it was a fellow by the name of Onesiphorus. Most of us, when we think of Onesiphorus, this is just kind of a name that we would just pass by and glance out very quickly and not think about the impact that this man had on the life of the Apostle Paul. Most of us probably don't even know about Onesiphorus. He's only mentioned 2 times in the scriptures. He's mentioned once over in 2 Timothy, the 1st chapter and verse 16, and then again over in the 4th chapter and verse 19, where when Paul addresses Onesiphorus, he doesn't address him as though he was addressing him personally, but he addresses the family of Onesiphorus because of what he had done for him when he found himself in the most desperate of situations. If you open your Bibles over to 2 Timothy, the first chapter, we'll talk a little bit about him in just a moment. Before we do so, let me give you a little bit of background information. To fully appreciate Paul's relationship with Onesiphorus, it's important for us to get a handle on the background, particularly where Paul was as he writes the letter to Timothy. Paul is in prison, but it's not like a prison he's ever been in before. This one here is a dead-end prison. It's not just any prison. According to biographer John Pollock, he was among the felons of Mamertine prison. And if it wasn't Mamertine prison, then it was equally an obnoxious dungeon that was reached by only a rope or a ladder that was cut in the hole of the roof above you and dropped down into a dungeon where there was nothing but hard stone and rough stone that was there. On the ground of Mamertine, there was not, any kind of bedding that was there in terms of maybe a burlap that had some, straw or hay stuffed into it to give comfort. There wasn't even straw on the ground. It was just a ground that was weepy with condensation and so forth. It was a place that had stale and foul air. Sanitation was completely absent. In fact, and when you talk about Mamertine prison and where Paul was, then I can guarantee you that people that went to Mamertine, they went there for only one purpose, and that was to die. Either you're waiting for your execution, or you're waiting for the time when you would eventually, because of some malady or because of starvation or something of that, your life would just expire. So when you went to Mamertine, it was the end of the road. I mean, that was it. Paul had feelings during that time. Generally, when we think of Paul as one who always stood extremely strong and that he was independent and that he just didn't need people, but you would find that that would not be the truth concerning him. No doubt he was a man of great fortitude and great inner strength and so forth, and he did trust on the love of the Lord. I had no doubts about that in my mind, but he was a human being. And as a human being, he felt the feelings of a human being who had felt abandoned by those he had tried to serve. If you were to look at 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, and if you were to verse 6 there, he says, I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. He knows that he is at the end of his life. He knows that he knows that death is creeping closer every day, and during that time he becomes maybe a bit nostalgic. And in those times, he probably, in the loneliness of the dungeon, would sit there, and he would think about faces and people that he had known during his ministry and his past. Names like Phygellus, names like Hermogenes, names like Onesiphorus, names like Demas, names like John Mark and Timothy. There's a flood of these names that comes into his mind as he thinks about these people that he has poured his life and his soul and his ministry into. And now he finds himself in this place. And he writes to Timothy, 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, beginning in verse 9, he says to Timothy, make every effort to come to me soon. For Demas has loved this present world and has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful for me for service. But Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak which I left at Troas, which Carpus and the books, especially the parchments. If you go on down, you'll read some other things about it, but Paul is lonely inside this prison, and he's cold. I don't believe only just was his physical body cold. I think there were other things that were cold. He talked about warmth, if you will. By implication, I need the warmth, of my cloak. The one that I left in Tarsus, bring that with you. I need the warmth of that around my body. I need the warmth of knowing that God is close by me and near to me. Bring my parchments. I need to read that. I need that encouragement that comes from the Word of God. And I want you to come yourself. Come soon. I need the warmth of friendship. I need the warmth of someone who knows what I'm going through, who loves me. You know how much I love you, Timothy. Come soon. And then he says, and come before winter, because it's really going to get hard if we wait to that period of time. And it's not because, Paul was not used to loneliness. Paul had been in prison before. He had been lonely before, but this loneliness, I think, is intensified. And it's intensified because there's this icy sting of being deserted. If you look at what he says here in verse 15 of chapter 1, he says to Timothy, he says, "You are aware of the fact that all those who were in Asia turned away from me, among whom are Phygellus and Hermogenes." All of the Christians of Asia had deserted him. Those who had stood with him in Rome, they have fled, leaving him to face the court senators and the council alone to defend himself. No one was there to say a good word for him. And not only that, he's going to face Nero. Nero is a crazy man. Nero would have felt very comfortable in Auschwitz as a Nazi. Nero had his mother executed. He had his two brothers executed because of his narcissistic view of life, and he was afraid that they may take his power away from him. He was so narcissistic that he would throw dinner parties and have Christians that they were persecuting, that they dipped in wax and then set on fire and used to light up his dinner parties. This is the kind of man that Paul was having to deal with, and so you kind of get an idea of why people left him. And though we read through Phygellus and Hermogenes very quickly as just kind of a passing names of someone to him, they come into stark remembrance. He can see their faces. He knows who they are. And he says, they have all gone away from him. No one supported me. All deserted me. When you look at the 4th chapter, verse 16, that's what it says. All left me. All deserted me. No one supported me. And you understand that because to hang out with Paul was an enemy of the state. Paul was scandalous. To hang out with Paul, to be associated with Paul, was possibly to draw the direct ire of Nero himself. And you could find yourself in a worse place than Mamertine. You could find yourself to be dead as well. What I'm trying to do is set for you a scene of what it would feel to be like Paul in this dungeon. To be all alone, to know that he has poured his life into these people in ministry. He has sacrificed so much for them. He has loved them. And then in his time of need, he says, they've all deserted me. That has to be the most terrible feeling in the world, to be forsaken, to be left behind, to be abandoned, to be left out in the cold. And then a bright spot happens. In the midst of this, he sees a face. And it was a friend worth remembering, and his name was Onesiphorus. The name itself is a wonderful name. You might notice on the title of the sermon this evening, it was one who brings help. That's what the name Onesiphorus means. It means one who brings help. Look at chapter 1, verses 16. I call it 16a. Paul said, "The Lord grant mercy to the house of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me." The only other time that Paul is going to mention him, well, once again, he'll talk about the household of Onesiphorus in chapter 4 and verse 19. Scholars say that because Paul writes his greetings to the household or to the family of Onesiphorus, is that it was not written personally to Onesiphorus, and the reason why is that they say that Onesiphorus is probably dead at this time. It's almost like a eulogy to some degree. He's remembering his dead friend who had often brought refreshment and a refreshing sense of life to Paul. Some say that he may have died because he chose to associate with the Apostle Paul. And because he associated with the Apostle Paul, his life was taken away from him. If this is so, then Paul's eulogy is for a man whose memory he holds dear. What did he do? Well, just thinking about Onesiphorus refreshes Paul's heart. He says in verse 16, he says, "He has often refreshed me." That word refresh in the original means to cool again. And so you could feel the burning abandonment that maybe Paul felt, and to know that there was this coolness, like a cool rag being put over a fevered head. This was Onesiphorus. He came into the life of Paul, and he was there for him when he needed him so much. Ministers of refreshment, that's what they do. We don't have to be called. We don't have to be told. We don't have to be sent a note. We know. And we often come. We don't just come once, but we come over and over again. As I think about our congregation and as I think about individuals, and here faces and names come to my mind of individuals that I know and here who have done this very thing for people in need. No one knows about it. They're not put in the church bulletin. They're not bragged about or anything like that. But I know about those things. Maybe a little bird told me or something, but I've heard about people that are doing these kinds of things. When you think about Onesiphorus, he's going to visit this famous apostle. But it's not like he's just going to drop in. When you talk about Onesiphorus coming to be with the apostle Paul, it's not as though he could jump in a cart and drive across town. Onesiphorus lived in Ephesus. Paul is in Rome, which means Onesiphorus, when he decides he's going to go find Paul, he has to cross the Aegean Sea, come to Rome. Upon arriving at Rome, one of the largest cities in the world. He's going to be faced with a maze of entangled streets that he's going to have to find a way to navigate through and to find this almost like a needle in the haystack to find out where Paul is. So he'll walk the streets. Maybe he'll knock the doors of individuals. Maybe somehow Onesiphorus will be able to identify or find those in the church and ask them questions about the Apostle Paul, and they'll say, here's where he is. And Onesiphorus will go to that place. He'll go to Mamertine. He will not go there once. He won't go there twice. It says that he often came here, and he refreshed me. Onesiphorus knows that there was a price tag to be paid for visiting with the Apostle Paul. All the others, they got it. All the others, that's why Paul says, they have deserted me. All those who were in Asia, they left me. Demas, he's left me. Crescens has gone here. This person has gone there. I'm by myself here. And Onesiphorus is that one that comes to him. Look at verse 16b through 18. Onesiphorus was not ashamed of my chains, but when he was in Rome, he eagerly searched for me and found me. The Lord grant to him to find mercy from the Lord on that day, and you know very well what the service he rendered at Ephesus. So to find Paul, Onesiphorus is going to have to go through a lot, but he is going to find him, and when he finds him, he brings him that refreshment that was so important, and the search may have cost him everything to do so. Okay, so that's the story. That's what Onesiphorus did for a friend who brought refreshment into his life. To some degree, he's a little bit like Lel Sokolov, a lot like him in a lot of ways. Sokolov, in a lot of ways. A man in a desperate place, a friend, and offered himself. So, question, how deep is our level of commitment to our friends? If you have a friend like that, then you have something extremely valuable. If you don't, then you've missed so much. Would we have done what Onesiphorus did? Do we have the necessary character qualities to offer up a ministry of refreshment that builds? Would we not be afraid of a person's chains? Obviously, the chains of our day are different from the chains of Paul in a dungeon, right? Our chains are different. Someone who has failed at work may be manacled to the chains of disappointment or humiliation. Or a person who's divorced, maybe they have the chains of rejection. I remember talking to Donna Young some years ago. She's a member over at Caldwell. She was divorced, and she remarried Norm Young, and I was once talking to her about being divorced, and she told me that to be divorced is worse than your mate dying, because if your mate dies, they die because they had no choice in the matter. But if your mate divorces you and leaves you, then that's rejection. And that is so hard. What about those people who are chained to that kind of feeling of rejection? A prisoner in the chains of disobedience, or a falsely accused person, the chains of misunderstanding, or a terminally ill person, the chains of awkwardness. Some of you may have known someone that is terminally ill, and you go to visit that person. Some of you don't know what to say or how to say it, and it's awkward. And because of that, we sometimes choose to maybe to shy away from that visit or going to that person. Will we be able to look past other chains? We don't have to search very far in our society to see the prisons of our society. For some people, their hospital room is their prison. For some people, their house is their prison. They're shut in. They can't get out of their house, and they feel like prisoners. For some, it could be a terrible illness or a malady such as AIDS or something of that kind of need. Can feel imprisoned and chained. Sometimes it could be a CEO that you would think it has it all together in their penthouse office. They are lonely. I think Solomon called them lonely dogs at the top, you know. These people have walls that are closing in. They're losing life's battle, and no one has the courage to stand by them. They need an onesiphorus. Okay, so, you know, as a minister of this congregation and one of the shepherds, our congregation has a membership of men, women, and children of 474 people. Obviously, I don't know what's going on in all of your families. Obviously, I don't know what's going on in all of your lives. I don't know what's happening to you individually. But there are those that you associate with that you do. You know the people that you know. You know your circle of acquaintances. You know your circle of friends. What I'm saying to you tonight is to think about ways in which you can become an onesiphorus to someone who is there in their deepest need. When elders don't know about it, when preachers don't know about it, but when you know about it, and when you know about it, don't keep it to yourself, but do something about it. And if you need to get others to help you, then solicit and ask people to come with me and help me do this, because it brings such help to that individuals. If you decide to pick up the ministry of the towel, where you serve people, God will not forget that. God will not forget that. In fact, over in Hebrews the 6th chapter and verse 10, it says, God is not unjust so as to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward his name, having ministered and still ministering to the saints. If you look at the Matthew the 25th chapter, and you go down there and you talk about, you know, the dividing of the sheep and the goats, Jesus is very aware of how we minister to those who are around us, how we deal with those who are thirsty, how we deal with those who are hungry, how we deal with those who are naked, how we deal with those who are sick, how we deal with those who are in prison, how we deal with, you know, put the dots after it and put a line in there. He's aware of whether we have done it. And Jesus says, if you have done it to the least of these, then you have done it to me. He takes it serious how we treat one another. There are some essential qualities in the ministry of refreshment and ministry of picking up the towel. There's nothing required, by the way. You don't have to go to school for it. None needed. You don't have to have a diploma. None needed. You don't have to have a lot of life experience. None needed. What you have to have is a heart with qualities in it. Flatterers need not. Has to be hired. He's just talking about people like you and me. So here are some qualities you might think about. One is unselfishness. Selfishness is placing the needs of others before ourselves. Availability. Availability means it's going to cost you time. Sensitivity, hearing what a person feels and intuitively knowing when you are needed. Determination, resolving to help in spite of the obstacles. A positive attitude, seeing beyond the present circumstance. One of the things that was so interesting about the tattooist of Auschwitz was that he never gave up hope. He could always see the future. He kept telling these 6 girls that he used to, was able to meet because they were, the Nazis had segregated them away and gave them special jobs because they were cute. He got to know them and so forth. One of which he fell in love with, and one of which he married after the war was over and the camp was done away with, and he found her almost by accident, but he found her and he married her. This guy always had such a positive attitude. He kept telling them, don't give up. Don't, just stay in there. He kept telling these girls, just be there. Just keep working. Keep getting up in the morning. Keep taking the next step. He just had this positive attitude, compassion, showing tolerance and mercy and understanding. Those are the things that people who are dying of thirst need. Those are the things that people who are lonely need. Those are the things that your friends need. Those are the things that your brothers and sisters need. Not all the time, but they do. And that's what this lesson is about. It's about becoming a person to help in time of need. Become an Onesiphorus whose name has been enshrined and written in granite because he refreshed Paul. In Kingdoms in Conflict, Charles Colson, Chuck Colson, and Ellen Santilli Bond, they describe a scene in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's novel, The Cancer Ward. The Cancer Ward is a scene of a grimness that depicts a world without compassion. In the story, it's a story about a young man who had cancer. He was a political prisoner. His name is Oleg. And he finds a woman in the hospital by the name of Zoya. And through a period of time, he becomes kind of a friend with her, and he asks if he could help her with record keeping. And she says to him, yeah, you can. And so he begins taking record and watching, and then one day as he's reading the patient's record, Oleg notices that hardly any deaths happen in the hospital. And then he said to her, he goes, I see, they don't allow them to die here. They manage to discharge them in time. Zoya responds, what else can they do? Judge for yourself. If it is obvious a patient is beyond help and there is nothing left for him but to live out the last few weeks or months, why should he take up a bed? People who could be cured are kept waiting. Days later, one of Oleg's gravely ill friends is told that he is being released from the hospital. The man struggles to get dressed. He says bye to his colleagues and then leaves the hospital with only one hope, and that is that he'll find a deserted bench in a park that he'll lay his body on until he dies. The cancer ward in Bond's and Colson's book is different from how they viewed Mother Teresa and her nuns who were in Calcutta and how they treated the terminally ill. Those nurses and nuns, they would tenderly dab the sores of lepers and cradle the sick until death. Colson and Bond write, sometimes Mother Teresa and her helpers are criticized. Why care for those who are doomed anyway? But she explains, they are created by God. They deserve to die with dignity. Why shouldn't we just discard those who have no utilitarian value? Because human life worth is intrinsic, breathed into the soul by God. By having compassion on the sick, the dying, the prisoner, and the cast aside stranger, we are caring for a part of God himself. If you've ever wondered how bad socialism is, this is what this is talking about. When someone says that no one's life is valuable beyond the age of 80, that they have lost their utilitarian value, they don't understand the value of a human being and the value of a soul. When someone aborts an infant in a womb, they don't understand the value of a soul, that God breathes into life and conceives life, human beings, to do so. Life is so valuable. Okay, I'm getting political here, so I better stop there. Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did to one of these brothers of mine, even to the least of them, you did it to me. Let me encourage you to find ways to be kind, to be compassionate, to love your church family, because we need you so much. Even the strongest of us, we need you so much. The lesson is yours, but together we stand and sing, and you respond as you feel the need.